Cari Didion, I believe, is presenting this, and this is co-authored with Michel Nguessan, and it is titled Names, Immigration Trends, and Cultural Identity, a study of ethnic restaurant and grocery store names in Greater Chicago. Michel is an associate professor of library and information sciences at Governor State University in Illinois. He has an academic background in and research interest in linguistics and onomastics, software engineering and computer science, library and information science, and port maritime management. He is a longtime member of the ANS, and I do want to give him a quick shout out for helping so much with the abstracts and working with the presenters for this. So special credit there. Professor Cari Didion is an associate professor of library and information science at Governor State University. She has an academic background in science education, library and information science, and higher education leadership. She holds master's degrees from the University of Georgia and San Jose State University, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in interdisciplinary leadership studies. And I will turn it over to Cari now.
Thank you for having us. Yes, I'm working with my colleague, Dr. Nguessan, and this is a really fun naming project that we came up with. We live in one of the best cities in the world. Chicago is my home where I've grown up, and I've traveled all over, and I always love coming home to Chicago and looking at just the area, the diversity, and all of that kind of stuff. So we were interested in looking at naming trends as they relate to immigration and cultural identity with grocery stores and ethnic restaurants. So let's move on here. Just a little quick outline here of our presentation. I'll kind of go through our introduction, some background thought. We broke it down into a couple of regions that we were looking at: European names, Latin American names, African and Middle Eastern, then Asian names, and then we'll follow up with a little bit of a discussion and a conclusion. Like I said, this is the best city in the world, right? And this is the best city for food. So I hope you're really hungry because we've got a very tasty presentation here. You can see the skyline of our beautiful city. The Chicago greater metropolitan area encompasses 3 different states. So in this map here, you'll see in the red here, this little red outline is the city of Chicago proper. But all of this is considered the Chicago metropolitan area, and it starts over here in Gary, Indiana. Takes a big swing out here to Joliet, to Aurora, Elgin, and then it even goes up to the Wisconsin border. So it's a very large area. About 9.45 million people inhabit this area, and we do have a lot of immigration and very cultural, very diverse kind of area and place. Okay. So we wanted to look at the restaurant and grocery store names because initially in Chicago's history, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was a lot of the Anglo-Saxon, right? It was the European culture. Names were initially Anglo-Saxon for things. You had your Italian restaurants, you had your Greek restaurants, and then other names kind of popped in there. Other groups came. We have Spanish, Polish, Greek, and we have a lot of. It's a foodie city. There's a lot to choose from. Kind of the background for this again is that we start early on in the Chicago area with restaurants being Anglo-Saxon. We have a lot of cultures and languages that are in this area, and that name is important. Names are important as part of a person's identity. And that, when you're naming a restaurant, it's like naming a baby, right? You want to communicate your presence. You want to show your attachment to your nation and your cultural origins. And you want to have that in a short, sweet name that's going to, make a connection in somebody's mind. And so this is kind of the background information that we worked off of. We took all of the, we broke it up into regions, like I said, so we have different regions here, and we looked at the European names as they transition, as the population grows, as more people take part of our city, then the things started to change. So we also have some other, Asian names. We have a very well-established Chinatown. We have a very well-established, Italian area, very well-established Greek area. And so now we're seeing a little bit more movement of other things, like maybe some things not as common. So Cambodian, Chilean, those types of things are moving through. So here's our European names. You can kind of see we gave you a list of names that are kind of popular around here. Vito and Nick's Pizzeria. You can see that they, named it after, Vito and Nick, right? It's pizza, so it goes there. And I pointed out that, or I'm pointing out here that it's established in 1920, and you'll see that a lot of these older Anglo-Saxon restaurants and names were from the 1920s or earlier. And so here, this business started 84 years ago. It's a family-owned business. You can kind of see how, the naming process went through there, and that they've actually been in business since 1932. So that's where those Anglo-Saxon names are coming from, Vito and Nick's. If we go back here, we can look at some European names that may not be so popular. We've got like Lithuanian Plaza. We've got Sarajevo Restaurant. So you can see they're named after places or just like, the name Lithuanian Plaza. We've got the Berghoff. If you've ever been to Chicago, the Berghoff is a very historical German restaurant. And its history, it talks about being 100% family owned. And what's cool about it, and I think a lot of those Anglo-Saxon names come from the 1800s when Chicago hosted the World's Fair. And that's exactly where Herman Berghoff started his business, selling beer at the World's Fair. And then that turned into a restaurant. And, we just used our last name to convey the German part of the restaurant. You'll see that the other ones in here too, we're using names or we're using places, and you'll see a little bit of a twist in the not so popular as we're moving forward. Latin American names. Chicago has a very large Mexican population. And so some of these kind of just fall into, like, we're so accustomed to having the Italian restaurants, the Mexican restaurants, they just kind of fall, they feel like they're American because they've been here so long. And so here's some of our Latin American names. Fogo de Chao is a big restaurant chain of Brazilian food here. And they have, went to the wrong tab. I was trying to close this one. They have, a history here. It's more of the high-end kind of stuff, but it gives you that steak experience, that Brazilian dining experience. Close this. And then when we go to the Latin American names that are a little less identifiable, you'll see we're going further out. We've got Taste of Peru. We've got Tanta, Chicago, Amaru. This one, Las Tablas, is a Colombian steakhouse. So the Brazilian, is the big kind of name. Here's a Colombian steakhouse that also has an interesting name. And I like their little history about their story, because the name Las Tablas comes from how the food is served. It's on wooden paddles and rustic, trendy kind of stuff. So that's where that name came from. So you can see how, like, the name shifts a little bit to the food, like the actual part of serving and prepping the food is a part of their name. We'll go to the next one here. African names. So we look at we looked at the different African names, and you can see, like, some of them, again, are places like Marrakesh in Morocco. You think of the market and that kind of stuff. Then we look at some of these other, African named food places. Gorée here, cuisine, also is another interesting story, because you'll see they have in their about, it's West African, Senegal, It's in the Kenwood neighborhood of Chicago. And so it brings those West Africa flavors and spices to, the area. The name comes from, and we should all know Senegal as the little island, which has a really dark history, right? It's the island of Gorée off of Senegal, where, the slave ships were taking humans, to different continents under enslavement. So that's a really powerful name for a restaurant. It speaks of, exactly where the place of where that food is coming from. And if we move on here, we have Middle Eastern names. I liked going through these because some of these are just fun. You can see like Naf Naf Grill talks about the food. Cafe Istanbul also talks about the city. This is a really sweet Jordanian family here that own this restaurant. And so their cuisine is built on burgers, as well as what does he have here? A falafel. So it's kind of the merging. You see how they're like merging together. And so this business, when we looked at the Italian business and the German restaurant, they were like 100 years old. This one is only 20 years old, and you can see the cute little family here. So they're trying to put their spin on American food, putting it together with their cultural food as well. And then we have some Asian names. Like I said, we have, Chinatown. We have a very established Chinatown store, shopping, market, all that good fun stuff, And again, I think we get used to this. So this is another restaurant here that has started, has been a long time staple of our Chinatown. Then you can see they branched out to many locations, just being a successful business here. And then we'll go over to another Asian one. You'll see, again, Nepal House, Cumin Restaurant, Himalayan Restaurant, very, it tells you exactly what it is. The Momo world from Nepal. And so I'm not sure what Momo is, but it's a dumpling. So here you go. They've named it after the actual cuisine that is there. So it's from the mountains of the Himalayas. Again, kind of like putting in a little more of the American, but introducing you to their main dish of Momo. And so this is another example of just a nice little business, family business in the city. So where does this get us? So, like I said in the beginning, naming a restaurant is like naming a child, naming a baby. You want it to be yours. You want it to say something. You want to reveal yourself to others and connect with people. You want to make sure that you're connecting with other people like you who maybe came from the area you came from, but you also want to integrate some of the other people and welcome the citizens of the Chicago area that aren't from your region. And this is a great way to build a multicultural and diverse communities, because we love to share food, right? We love to sit down and share food and have that conversation. And so just looking at these trends and seeing how, back in time, how things have changed, how some of the popular ethnic names are becoming more mainstream, where we don't even think about it, less ethnic. So we conclude with our paper is looking at, the attachment of the national and cultural origins to the naming process. We want to make sure that we are still being good citizens, global cultures, and that kind of thing. So we want to make sure that there's more research on etymology and the semantics of names and their geographic distribution, right? Because you're going to see pockets in certain areas in the greater Chicago area and how they change over time. Some neighborhoods may have been Irish Catholic for 1,000,000 years, and now they're changing, into different areas. And so you'll see how those names change, and we want to quantify that information. So that brings me to the conclusion. I don't know if Michel would like to pipe in or if we have any questions, but thank you. And thank you for letting me be a part of this day.
I will say a few things before we start the question part. The purpose of the study of names here in an urban area like Chicago is to see who is here that was not originally here, how the demographic, the cultural landscape is changing in the Chicago area. And the concept of ethnic, originally, the region being settled by Anglo-Saxon, typically from the British Island, the names were English. And then as other Europeans came in, the first ethnic restaurant were European restaurants from Eastern Europe, from Southern Europe, from other European areas like Germany, Greek, and Poland. So ethnic name at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century were these other European names. And as we moved along, those European names became kind of popular. By becoming popular, they become less ethnic. And then the new ethnics that came in were the Asians, particularly with the Chinese in the first half of the 20th century, with the Japanese, and then the Korean. So the Eastern European and Southern European names became less ethnic, and the new ethnics were these Asians. And along the way, these new ethnics also became so popular. Like a Chinese restaurant has become a kind of mainstream restaurant in the Chicago area. Then other ethnics came along, ethnic from Latin America, from Asia, from smaller countries in Asia, and from smaller countries in Africa, as you can see. And among the Latin American, because we have so many Mexicans and because we have so many Mexican restaurants around, that has become ethnic. So the semantics of the concept ethnic keep moving as these restaurants from these places become more and more popular. But ultimately, what we see through these names is the desire from people coming from other areas to maintain or kind of express their cultural and national origin. It is a desire to call in other fellow citizens from where they come from. It is also a desire to tell other people around here that they exist and they have something to share with everybody. And ultimately, immigration trends with the names that coming from these restaurant names let us know how diverse our community is. And it let us know that we are building what the first president of Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor, called la civilisation de l'universel, a universal civilization where everybody brings along what they have to offer to the rest of the world. This is what Chicago is. This is what we wanted to show to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel, and thank you, Cari. That was great. So interesting. I agree. Chicago has great food. I've been there many times, and yeah, it's terrific. I have a real quick question, and then we'll get to Cleve and then to Marianne. The first question is sort of two parts. One is, did you notice any difference in the naming of higher end restaurants and not lower end, but more like neighborhood or family restaurants? And two, did you find any restaurants that were not named in such a way that you could identify the ethnicity of the food or the folks who were running them? Because as Michel was just saying, clearly the name is meant to clue you into what kind of food it is or where the people came from. But are there many that just don't? Like you wouldn't know by the name. You just say, what kind of food is this? And you'd have to look at the menu.
Yes, I would say that there was both of that there are definitely some that were like um, uh, not identifiable. And I think the search process too, looking for specific, we broke it down into the different regions that kind of helped us. So we knew, that we were in that ballpark. They were on our list of slides. There are several like Michelin star restaurants there, and they seem to be less of like the family naming. I mean, to me is how I took it, and more of a broad name
Mm-hmm.
that was open to a lot.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah, there are many cases where there is a subtitle. The subtitle help us. They have the name, particularly when it's in the original language, and we will not understand. And then you have the name, and then they put a subtitle, Mexican restaurant or Korean restaurant or restaurant, a taste of Peru or something like that. So there is, in many cases, when they know that the name will not be easily perceived, there is a subtitle. That helped a lot.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Very obvious way. Cleve, go ahead.
I really appreciated your presentation and your research, but I wonder if in the future you might consider using a different term than Anglo-Saxon. I would imagine a lot of those Irish Catholics you mentioned would be offended by being called lumped under Anglo-Saxon. You know, they would not think that was an accurate term at all, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, and Marianne, please unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I have. Did I?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, very interesting. Thanks. And you framed it in terms of immigration, but what I was wondering is if if in the culinary landscape of Chicago, there's some kind of native indigenous cuisine, and maybe you'd find restaurants with, I don't know, Menominee or Anishinaabe or Algonquian names. Is that part of the landscape? And if so, would they be identifiable, or would they maybe choose not really identifiable names?
We try to find Native American names, but we did not find restaurant names in the area. Probably we don't have a lot of them around here. Maybe we didn't, our search was not complete enough for us to have found something that exists around, but we didn't find that. We assume that probably the demographic representation in the Chicago area maybe is not big enough for them to create a restaurant. Because as we said, the first customers of those ethnic restaurants are people from the same origin.
There is a question in the chat. I would like to know if you have examples of business names that seem to be more of a signal to insiders, using words only known to that ethnic community that would be opaque to outsiders. An example from Seattle is Guanacos. This would not read to USA people as Salvadorian, but Central Americans would know what it is.
Yeah, there are many names like that. Most of the time, there are many names that will make sense only for people from that same origin. Because there is a grocery store where I usually go, the name is Makola. Makola is a name, the name of the central open African market in the city of Accra in Ghana. If you are not from West Africa, you would know what that means. And those of us who go to that place are those of us who are from that area. When I go there, typically I meet people from Ghana, people from the Ivory Coast, which is a neighboring country of Ghana, and then Liberia, Nigeria. Probably those of us who are close enough to understand what that means. So we know that it's an African place because we know the area. So you see many other names that won't mean anything to nobody else except those who come from there. If they don't put a subtitle, only people from the same place would understand. And as I said, also for the name Gore that Cari commented, it's a symbolic name in West Africa. And in this big world, most of the time, West Africans would understand the symbolism of that name. Unless you go to Senegal.
And I think too, like a future offshoot of this would be to look at like some of the grocery stores that have duality, you know, and Michel can talk about like they may have two regions that they serve, or you know, they may have, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that, because the one area may be too small or not have the market for it.
Yeah, that's the case of restaurants that serve Baltic food. Probably the Baltic population is not big enough to have specific Baltic restaurants. Most of the time they are combined with Polish So several Polish restaurants also serve Baltic, and they see that you see that combination in the name. And we also found out that a lot of Middle Eastern places do not point specifically to a country, because probably it's probably a traditional kind of overall Arabic culture or Arabic type of food. So you don't always know in many cases, they just say Middle East, Middle Eastern, without pointing to a specific country. And when we go to, when I shop in those places, those places, when you have a broad name like that, you will see Egyptians, you see Jordanian, Palestinian, and things like that.
What you just said reminded me, so I live in the Bay Area here, and we have quite a few restaurants that are called Mediterranean restaurants.
Yeah.
That typically have, some of them have that word in their title, but they don't serve Greek food. It's kebabs and hummus and things. So it's, when they say Mediterranean, it's another way of saying Middle Eastern, perhaps. So they don't want to say Middle Eastern, so they'll say Mediterranean instead.
Exactly. And when you see that, so we have both here, Middle Eastern or Mediterranean, but most of the time they include several countries from the area, particularly countries with big population like Egypt.
This is not a question, but your comment, Laurel, just made me think that that term Mediterranean allows them to avoid some tricky issues. Like, for example, Greek coffee versus Turkish coffee, Greek yogurt, Turkish yogurt, and other countries too, I'm sure. So very smart strategically of them.
Yeah, I agree. And from a naming point of view, it covers many things. You can do a lot under that. You can serve lots of different kind of food, and no one can hold you accountable and say, this isn't Greek coffee or Turkish coffee or whatever it is. And one more comment from Alexa. Very similar to when I lived in Japan and China, you would have American restaurants that served all kinds of USA, Mexican, and European food. Because that's, it's always very interesting to go abroad and see what people think is American food in restaurants or in grocery stores, especially when they have an American food section, what they put there, because sometimes it's incredible. Not what Americans would consider American food.
And yet maybe that's a reflection of the fact that we are comprised of so many ethnicities. The same way that the Mediterranean Sea, many countries border on that. So are they in fact wrong in using that term? I don't know. A semantic question, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not wrong to use Mediterranean from my point of view as a namer. It's not wrong to use it. It just means you're embracing the possibilities, right? You're letting people interpret it as they will, which is probably better for you because then people don't really have a set expectation. What an interesting topic. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really, really great.
Thank you.
I will mention
our tasty topic.
it was very tasty. I just want to mention to you guys and for some of the folks who gave their papers earlier, next year in names, we are going to have a special issue about brand names, and a paper like this would absolutely be something that we would want to consider for that. So please do consider submitting it. We'll be putting out a regular call for papers for that issue sometime in the next month or so. So anybody who's presenting on brand names, we would love to see these in that issue of names. Great.